The Graphic Histories Podcast.
I got bit by a radioactive bug. I tried an experimental drug. Went up for a stroll on a gamma testing range. I found an enchanted hurricane. I made a serum that made me small. I modified the serum so it would make me tall. Radioactive isotope in my eyes. Dying alien helped me accessorize. I gained the proportion and strength of a spider. Now I'm invincible and I can fly. I lost my sight, my other senses were heightened. I'm gonna put on my pajamas and go fight crime.
Hey there, and welcome to the Graphic Histories Podcast. My name is André. I will be your podcast host. Big thanks to Oogle the Mock for our theme song, Superpowers, and big thanks to you, gentle listener, for tuning in once again to another episode. This is episode 101. Yes, we've broken 100 after our special anniversary episode 2 weeks ago, in which Davin Scalhorn stepped in as temporary host and hosted yours truly. Got to learn a little bit about me, about my thoughts on the podcasting thing, about my life, etc. It was fun. It was a neat little exercise and a fun way to celebrate 100 episodes of this show. And I can't thank Davin enough for doing that, and also for continuing to be my co-host over on the X-Rated X-Men Anime Review Show. In the last couple weeks, he was sick one day, and I could have used the excuse to not do an episode, and then my wife had family visiting last week, so I thought it was best to spend time with them. Still only here for a few days, so we had a little bit of a break, but we're back next week. And I didn't really have a break here. I just changed the timing to Monday mornings just to give me a little extra time on the weekends to get this stuff ready when life gets a bit busy, as it has been lately. In my personal day-to-day life, hey, before I get to that, let's talk about what this episode is about. Today's episode is actually two guests that have been in the show before. As I jokingly said, they were two great tastes individually. Now they're two great tastes that'll taste great together. We have Troy Little and Jim Zubb on the show once again. I've spoken with each of them individually, but this time I hosted a panel at the East Coast Comic Expo in 2023, in which I interviewed both of those guys and had them talk about the experience of working on the book, the Dungeons & Dragons, and what it meant to them, and the labor-intensive work of combining the history of all the different rule changes for Dungeons & Dragons and the different stories and characters, and how accurate that comic is. I didn't realize how insane, because I've never been a big Dungeons & Dragons guy. I never really played it. I'd like to, just never did. And learning about the detail, the attention that was paid to it by Jim and Troy, it's crazy, and you'll hear about that in the episode. So this was another first for the show, besides for having a former guest on again. This time I guess we had Davin on, but anyway, this time it's our first live taping of the show. I mean, in a way, we'd recorded this episode live at the panel at East Coast Comic Expo, which is very cool and a fun little way to do that. I'd like to get an opportunity to do that again, hopefully at other conventions that I'm attending over the years. It's a fun way to get episodes in, and also, I'm there anyway. I'm usually selling my art, selling my wares. Going on my life right now, not a whole lot. Feeling a little dejected and curious about the state of things when it comes to theater in my town. I don't want to go on a big tirade, however. I proposed a play to my local theater group that I do theater with, and I have a feeling it's not going to get approved, mostly because of the content. It's a Kurt Vonnegut book, or rather play, written by Kurt Vonnegut, who's written many books, if you're familiar with his work. It's transgressive. It mostly has to deal with toxic masculinity and the sort of bravado that comes from strong men who think that that means that they can do whatever they want, or that that's the way men should be, and then the sort of juxtaposition of that versus, the 70s when a softer, more emotional, friendly man appeared, and what happens when two such people kind of put into a situation to butt heads against one another. It's very good. It's a very good play. It's called Happy Birthday, Wanda June by Kurt Vonnegut. And it's the first one I've read after reading many, many plays that I liked and wanted to direct again. So, although I think it's not going to go through. I think the board is going to decide that it's going to be too much headaches. They're going to have to deal with complaints and this and that, which deeply saddens me. I'm not really upset about it. We still have a meeting coming up. I just think I mean, theater's supposed to be transgressive. It's supposed to make you think. It's supposed to make you question why things are the way they are, and also question your experience with these matters. I think that's what makes good theater good. The theater group I'm in does a lot of comedies. Nothing wrong with that. People like to laugh. But I just think there's room for something different, and it kind of saddens me that I may be the only one. Not the only one. There are others in the group that I know would love to do it. But I am the only one that feels that strongly about it, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what to say about it. I don't even know if I should be venting here on this, but I just feel as though, life throws you some stuff every once in a while that kind of can make you feel dejected and a little lost. And it's just one of those sort of crossroads, I guess, that we all come to, where we have to think about what's next and maybe shift a little. Yeah. One thing that's helped, actually, is I've been watching the last season of Ted Lasso, which is such a great show. A lot of kindness. And I mean, the pure center of that show is just kindness, and something we could all use a little more of, for sure. The show does a very good job of reminding us how important it is to just be kind to one another. And then that can be tough to remember sometimes in our modern world, but it's important. So anyway, without much further ado, let's go to today's episode. Today's episode is, once again, was filmed at the East Coast Comic Expo. I got to see a lot of my friends while I was there, people I haven't gone to see in a while, and also rub some shoulders with other industry people. A lot of people that are on the show. I got to meet Adam Gorham in person. I got to meet Peter Bro in person. I got to meet, some of the people I've had in the show before, I've met in person, but it was cool seeing them again. So yeah, it was a real joy to meet those guys and actually get to have a conversation, not through a screen with them, which is great. But this one is the East Coast Comic Expo panel on Rick and Morty and Dungeons & Dragons with Jim Zubb and Troy Little.
Hello. Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah, welcome everyone to the to East Coast Comic Expo's panel with Jim Zubb here and Troy Little on their Rick and Morty Dungeons & Dragons collaboration, which I see some of you holding. So obviously we have a few fans here.
Thank you. We
Blah, 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 blah.
Thanks. Clap. Do all the things. It's great.
Do we have? Are we predominantly Rick and Morty fans, or yes?
Okay.
All right.
Excellent.
Both
Good.
excellent.
Best combo. Well,
So how many of you have any of you not played Dungeons & Dragons? Anyone? Everyone's played Dungeons & Dragons here? You have not played? Good news, your first lesson starts today. No, I'm just kidding.
your sheets are under your chair.
You'll be leaving here with a character sheet and a dream, sir. That's how it's going to work. It's going to be good.
Reach under your chairs, get your sheets.
Yeah, so...
Is this 4E rules?
what's that?
4E rules?
No, we're going to probably be doing... we'll do some BEX and
Okay.
we'll take it old school. No, so we're going to, talk about our collaboration and stuff like that and Dungeons & Dragons and all the goodness and try and give you guys a good overview. We'll take some questions. We'll cause some chaos. It'll be nice.
It'll be lovely.
It'll be a fun Saturday afternoon here in Moncton.
That's right. Well, yes, absolutely. So let's...
Lock the doors.
They
No one
can't
gets to
escape.
leave.
That's right. Not until they get their character sheet set up.
Fail your saving throw. You leave
Yeah,
feet
well,
first.
it's funny when you guys just start chatting about the rules there because,
Yeah.
like Jim, you're like almost a Dungeons & Dragons historian. Like when we talk to
it's a little
you know
mean.
so much about the history and also like the various rules and the changes.
Yeah, I have a problem. So what happened was I started playing Dungeons & Dragons when I was 8 years old, and I know that for a fact because the red box set from the 80s says 9 and up, and my brother would be like, this is too old for you. You can't play this, because older brothers are dicks.
Yes.
And so...
It's in the contract.
yeah, we started playing D&D, and he was 4 years older than me, so I was 8, he was 12. And because of that, we couldn't do most things together. Like, we couldn't play sports or anything because he was way bigger than me. Even hand-eye coordination for video games, he would just trounce me. But in Dungeons & Dragons, I get my turn. And on my turn, I get to tell him what I want to do. So first of all, he had to listen to me. And as a younger brother, that's very important. And second of all, if I could make him laugh, that was pretty much the greatest thing ever. I could make him laugh. If tears were running down his face and he lost all control, snot or anything, I was like, well, I am the coolest person in the room now. So I would crack up my older cousins and my brother. And it made me want to tell stories and entertain people. I would not be a writer now without Dungeons & Dragons. It made me creative, it made me collaborative and excited and desperate for attention. So yeah.
As anyone in the public eye must be.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, right.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
How about you have a connection to Dungeons & Dragons, Troy?
I played the Red Box. I played the Expert editions. I was into the Unearthed Arcana of the day, and that was in the 80s. The usual problem is trying to get your friends together on a consistent basis to actually keep a game going seemed to be a problem, and eventually
Everyone in the club, they go,
everyone's nodding. Anyone who's trying to
all
organize adults at any point in their lives
That's
have had
right.
this problem.
it fell apart.
Yeah.
So when I was approached to do the Rick and Morty D&D, I had not played D&D in a long time, and my kids were just getting to be of an age, and D&D becoming popular enough that it was on their radar. And I said, hey, what if I picked myself up a little 5e box set, relearned the rules, and introduced the kids to it? Which was an interesting experiment because they had character sheets. They're like, where's the board game?
Right.
When do we do what? And I'm trying to DM them into like, okay, you need to decide what to do. And they're staring at me like, we want me to talk? And
Yeah.
they had
Collaborate.
no
Imagination.
my NPC character was leading them along until they ran a few crit fails, and it got funny. Once it got funny, it got fun,
That's
and then
right.
they clicked and went, "Oh, okay, I get it now." And we played for a while until eventually TikTok took over.
My brother and I mean, we played so obsessively. And then my mom saw one of these talk shows where they were talking about, satanic panic stuff.
I was going to get into that. I was wondering
And so
if that,
she actually took our books away, and we were really upset about it. And we were smart enough that we knew if we freaked out, that would only feed they're crazy cultists now. We can't let them keep the books.
They've
But we
gotten
wanted
freaked
our
out.
books back. And so we ended up talking to my dad and being like, look, it's not evil. It's just a game and all this sort of stuff. And we finally convinced my dad to play a game with us. And my dad is the least nerdy human on earth. He was a science teacher in high school, and that was what he did. And he was very logical, and he watches sports, and he likes he does not have a nerdy bone in his body. And so my brother is going to dungeon master him, and we're going to show him how to play D&D. And my brother is 12. So he methodically makes my dad make a character step by step. Nowadays, you'd give someone a pre-gen character. You'd make it as welcoming as possible. He made it just excruciating. It took my dad 2 hours to make the character, and he's questioning every part of the process. He's filling out the character sheet like it's accounting, you know what I mean? And then it's first edition D&D.
Yeah.
So my dad's character dies in like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
He gets killed by a giant spider in like the first dungeon we go in. I am howling. I think this is the most hilarious thing on earth. My dad is just grim. And he finishes this up, goes into the room. This really happens. He goes into the bedroom. They can talk. My brother and I go to the room next door and cup our hands to the wall so we can hear them talking. And she goes, Joe, well, is it evil? And he goes, Hermine, it's not evil. It's just stupid. They just sit at the table and they talk and they talk and they talk and they add numbers up and they roll dice and they talk some more. Just give them the damn books. They're not causing any problems and they're not committing any crimes. At least we know where they are.
Yeah.
And we got our books back. And I always wanted to, if I ever had my druthers and we could re-release the red box set with a quote on the cover that just said, "It's not evil, it's just stupid," I would be like, there you go.
Somewhere Gary Gygax is just nodding.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's like just a chaos machine. That's what's so great about RPGs is that collaborative quality of them. And so when it came time, the Rick and Morty D&D comic came about in the weirdest way possible. So IDW are the guys that publish the Dungeons & Dragons comics. Oni Press publishes Rick and Morty. And from what I heard, some of the editorial staff of both, everyone knows each other in comics. Mm-hmm. They went out for dinner one night, and someone, I guess a couple beers in, said, what if we did some team-ups between our different comic series? And people were just throwing random books that these different companies owned, into the pot. I don't know who said it. Someone said Rick and Morty Dungeons & Dragons. And everyone chuckled. And then it just sort of stuck. It had gravity, and everyone just kept thinking about it. The next day, Sarah Gatos, who was at IDW at the time, she just beelines over to my table, because I had been writing the official Dungeons & Dragons comics since 2014. And at the time, when I was doing that book, the only reason I got that book was because 5th edition was coming out, and I convinced them to relaunch the series. It's funny now because so many people say to me, "How did you get that plum gig?" And I was like, "No one wanted to do D&D at the nadir of like 4th edition. No one gave a damn, you know." And I was luckily able to kind of ride the rocket. So Sarah comes to me and said, "We had this weird idea of Rick and Morty Dungeons and Dragons. Are you interested?" And I said, "Oh, I'm 100% interested, but it will never happen." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "You're talking about Hasbro's crown jewel right now and Adult Swim's crown jewel. These two companies will never come to an agreement." And that was true in the sense it took them 9 months to put the contract together and come to terms on it. And so every like 3 or 4 months, Sarah would contact me and go, "We're still talking about Rick and Morty D&D." And I was like, "That's nice." And I just said, I totally dismissed it like it was not a thing. And the next thing I knew, Charlie Chu contacted me about Oni, and he said, "We've got Pat Rothfuss interested." Pat, most of you guys probably know, he's this incredible fantasy prose author and just done some incredible work. And he has become a bit of a nerd celebrity of his own right, and he had some really cool thoughts about Rick and Morty through Dungeons and Dragons. So we met up a year after that original conversation at Emerald City Comic Con and went out for dinner. And Troy's name was already on the list at that point. We were like,
I'm completely oblivious to all of this. I'm doing whatever it is I'm doing in PEI. They're making machinations behind the thing.
yeah.
And when it finally came to my, would you be interested in doing this? All I had seen is like a clip or two of Rick and Morty on YouTube, and I thought, this is the ugliest looking cartoon. This is one of those ad lib, written by actors kind of cartoons with poor animation and stuff, and I didn't want to give it the time of day. So when they offered me the job, I said, "Give me a few hours. I need to watch a few episodes before I decide if this is something I even want to do." And the first few episodes, I thought, this is awful. This is everything I thought it would be.
Oh, geez, I've never heard this story.
No,
now
I
I'm
know.
really fascinated. Go on.
Until a certain episode hit, and it was the Cronenberg's episode.
Oh,
the
Yeah.
of
Love
course.
Potion.
It had to be that
So
one.
good.
And I was like, this show is brilliant.
Yeah.
So I all of a sudden, it felt like they got their legs, you know. And
the
I was like,
Meeseeks one blew me away. The first time I
Meeseeks
saw the
was great.
Meeseeks one killed me.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Once they start injecting more like broken human stuff
Yeah,
into
yeah.
it.
Well, that's the thing, and I was so sorry. Go ahead, finish your coming on board.
So yeah, it was a matter of kind of like, do I want to do this show? And then the style kind of won me over, especially the background designs and the visuals. Like,
It was the Plumbus. The Plumbus.
Plumbus was the thing, yeah. But for an artist, it's like you're looking at something that's kind of ugly, but it works because it's animated. It's moving all the time. Any static shots of Rick and Morty, they can be very stiff and marionette-like. And when you're doing comics and everyone can kind of hold on a panel, it's kind of how do you kind of bridge a gap between doing what looks like the show and still injecting some energy and life to it to bring it alive, and could I do that? So I did some test drawings just to see if I can kind of make that happen. You want to keep the licensor happy, but you also want to make it something
Fun you can
live on the
draw.
page, something fun to do. If I'm going to be on board for drawing hundreds of pages of this thing, I better like it. I better want to do it. And so, yeah, I kind of watched a few more episodes, and then I was hooked. I was hooked, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. I want to do this. I get the humor. And the scripts coming in were like, this is going to be a lot of fun. And then the stuff Jim was sending me, like, you couldn't have a better guy to kind of guide you, like
Compulsive.
a Sherpa, a
'Cause
D&D
we would-
Sherpa,
Yeah, in Rick and Morty D&D, we go through all 5 editions, and so I wasn't just sending Troy reference. I would say these are first edition versions of these monsters.
Oh, yeah, my kobolds were way too tall.
That's
and you're
right.
like, that's 3rd edition kobolds.
And so I was sending him all this reference, very specific, very page and verse, and all
I
this
love when he
weird
was
stuff.
really mean about it too.
Yeah,
You idiot.
Idiot.
And Rod, so when Pat came on board, I was a little bit nervous. Obviously, Pat's this luminary of literature, and co-writing is really a hard gig. You don't know if you're going to be compatible. Just because they write stuff even that you like doesn't mean this is going to work
Yeah,
collaboratively. And we got on a call, and the very first thing he said is, he goes, I have a mission statement. And I was like, oh, shit. This could be dangerous. And he
It's
said
6
to me,
pages long.
he said, the best Rick and Morty episodes have pathos. They're not just goofy ideas. They're like rich, dark character stuff. We have to do rich, dark character stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm in. And then he said, we're not here to take down D&D, we're here to celebrate it, but part of celebrating it is all the stupid parts. And I was like, exactly, right? And so I said, oh yeah, we're going to get along just fine. And Pat hadn't done comics before, which was hilarious because he hasn't done commercial stuff before either. So he would write these huge like documents of scenes and ideas, and I would go, okay, we have 22 pages, we got to like fit this massive thing. And then I had my own ideas we were throwing into it as well, and we would distill it down into this script and send it for approvals. And Pat is the guy who's got 100 ideas, so he would then go, oh, we have to also add this. And I was like, Pat, the book is bursting at the seams, there's no more room. And he's like, no, but if we don't have this, we're dead in the water. We have to. And I was like, I don't think it works that way. And he's very much used to his own fiction.
Yes.
And so we would have not even a tug of war, just like I think that is a cool idea. Let's see if we can pack that in somewhere else. Let's see if we can bring it in.
Did any of that
another
get boiled
point.
aside to the sequel?
Some of it got moved over to other, to the game box
Yep.
set and all that other stuff we did. I mean, one of the things I'm most pleased about is that when they first announced it, we got a lot of flack because people were like, oh, this will be a soulless corporate crossover. And then it came out, and we got these grudging reviews where people were like, this is far better than it has any right to be. And I was like, yes.
Yes.
That's what I like to hear.
I feel like as a
Drag
writer,
you kicking and
that's- yeah.
screaming to this crossover is good. Because there are a lot of hokey crossover.
Oh, yeah,
things.
100%.
And But we put our hearts into it and had a lot of fun with it and, sweated on it a lot. But Troy sweated the most of all because it's one thing to draw a dozen creatures attacking the family.
Yeah.
This will be hilarious.
I could definitely see now the experience that Jim brings to the page as a scriptwriter when I could see he didn't get final pass. I'd be reading it and I'm like, Jim hasn't seen this. Because it would be a scene description with so part of the challenge as the artist is to interpret what the writer wants to communicate on this page.
Yep.
And then bring my storytelling to it. How do I show that? How do I make it read legibly, clearly, show action, show emotion, or whatever needs to happen within the confines of 11 by 15 or 10 by 15 space? And I'd have a panel, it would be like a large splash panel. Okay, that's going to take up this much room, where all this stuff is happening. And then on the same page, it would be so Morty finds a secret passageway. He opens the door and he goes down it. But he wrote that as one panel, not 3 separate actions.
And you're like, that doesn't work.
I'm like, I've already got 9
These are
panels on this
snapshot
page.
moments. That's the thing about comics people forget, though, especially if they come from screenplays, they will write action. And you have to, yes, you're showing action, but you only get one moment. There's rare exceptions, like in a Spider-Man comic, you can do those ghosted after images of acrobatics or something, where Spidey's moving, or the Flash moves faster than light or whatever. But most of the time, a character does one thing in a panel, and then you're like, I have 5 panels, 6 panels. You're pushing it past that, And I can always tell when someone is inexperienced with comics because they will write camera movements. They're like
a sweeping pan over
his
the
back. His back is turned to us as he smirks, and you're like, the back is turned. We don't see the smirk, but in their head, it's 2 separate shots, or it's a sweeping, camera move, or a zoom in, or a zoom out, and you're just like, dude, that's not how this works.
Which is funny considering how, like, in the film industry, like, most times they storyboard, which is basically just making a little comic about what the movie's going to look like.
Right? But it's also, you have the same composition, shot to shot to shot.
Yep.
But it's a fascinating thing. So, and then trying to distill some of that stuff down. And Pat and I, it was always like an idea factory. We were always throwing all sorts of wild, crazy crap. And Pat actually read a lot of D&D stuff when he was younger, but he couldn't find a group. He got into D&D even a little earlier than I did. And it was like the darkest pre-internet, where it's like, other people don't play D&D. You don't admit you play D&D. It's too embarrassing.
Yeah.
And so he didn't even have a regular group. He would just read the books quietly by himself and imagine what it was like to play.
Oh, that's so sad.
And so, so he would make up his own fantasy stuff. Yeah. Whereas I was always like reading the rules and obsessing over the canon and Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or these different locations and trying to inject as many in-jokes of that stuff into the books. And so I would bring up something I thought was really funny to Pat, and he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I was like, no, dude, in Greyhawk, they've got this stupid place called this, and we can do a joke about it. And he's like, I believe you. I was like, all right, cool. So that was a lot of fun.
Well, the one of the more interesting things I found coming to Troy with the art stuff is like the various versions of Rick and Morty you had to draw.
Yeah, all the alternates.
All the different
Oh my God,
alternates for
yeah.
the different
through the
versions,
different
for the
editions or when the
editions.
characters die.
And even in the second book with Painscape, where Rick has created a folio of Ricks, like throwaway characters he never played because they sucked.
Yeah.
Barge Rick, Wizard Rick, all these
Yeah,
great
Bird Rick,
Barbaric.
Claire Rick.
There were so many fun characters. I'm like, I want a whole miniseries of each one of these characters. 'Cause
And
they're
we're
so much
killing
fun.
them.
And we're killing them in one
in mere panels.
I've designed all these things, and you've
I
killed
know,
them off.
I know.
I
I'm like,
draw
that's
their
funny.
death scenes.
You know? And
Merciless, this guy.
the first miniseries was Pat and I, collaborating together, and then it did so ludicrously well that Wiz of the Coast came and said, "We're thinking of doing a game set," and we were just like, "Are you serious? Like, this seems maniac to me." And Pat was super busy with other stuff, so they asked me if I would come in and consult on it. So I came up with some of the big elements of it. I wrote the first, I think, like 10 or 12 rooms of the dungeon, and I sent them bullet points of a bunch of other weird crap in the dungeon that they used. Probably my favorite room, spoilers, for the D&D box set is the Mimic room.
Shut up.
I love the Mimic room.
That thing, I fell for every mimic. In that
So
room.
you go into the room, and there's a chest sitting on a pedestal, and you're like, oh, clearly this is a trap. And so you're like, well, I'm not going to fall for that trap. And they're like, good, because the chest is a mimic, but also the pedestal is a mimic, and so is the floor. The floor is also a mimic.
I fell for every one of
So
them.
you just keep getting attacked by mimics over and over again, which that was really fun. There's a riff on, so in the red box, there's a series of rooms in that old dungeon, and I copied every one of them, but made a terrible version of it, including the magic mouth room, but I made it way grosser, where
was
he like
so
licks
gross.
his lips and
Yeah.
like, it's disgusting. I love it. We had the goblins that were playing D&D, like sitting in a corner, which I was really happy about. And then I also had, there was a room full of rats in the original one, and I always imagined, I said, man, they must be filthy. So it was just like rat poop everywhere, how much rat poop would build up in a dungeon over decades.
If the room full of rats.
A couple of times we played this online with you as Rick
Yes.
and me in the yellow shirt as his Morty foil. And every time we played online, it always ends with us naked and afraid.
Because,
It's so good.
well, if you fail the riddle room, all your possessions get teleported away, so you're naked.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
But it's like the family all together, and now they're naked running around the dungeon.
That's not uncommon
Now,
on that
the
show.
great thing is the first time you did that, and we all lived naked and afraid.
Yeah.
I was like, what the hell was that riddle? So I went and looked up the module, and I found out the answer.
Yeah.
So the second time we played it,
I did a different riddle.
no. What happened was you did the same thing, and I answered it correctly as
Yeah.
Morty, and you were like taken off guard.
Oh, that's
And
right,
then
I
you were
forgot.
like,
Yeah,
I don't care. You're naked anyway.
That's not the answer. I don't like
Game's
it.
over. Rick doesn't want to play anymore.
That's
you
right.
know?
Yeah, when, it's so weird because normal D&D, is much more collaborative and engaging in that way. And playing the Rick and Morty D&D, you are purposefully being antagonistic.
You were Rick.
Yeah, it's like an exaggerated version of first edition where the DM is the heartless god trying to destroy you. But it's even worse because it's also Rick's ego, where it's
Yeah.
like if you win, then you can't be smarter than Rick.
You're not
Therefore,
allowed.
he will win.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely not.
And so it's this weird thing. I know some people, it's their introduction to D&D, and that scares me because they're like, is this how it's supposed to work? And you're like, no, that's the joke, see. Rick is terrible as a dungeon master, and he's a terrible collaborator and all these other things. It's his ego on the line every time. But it's so much fun to play, though. As long as you go in with that knowledge where you're like, we will not win, but something fun and ridiculous is going to happen.
Yeah. Like
And everything is about, there's a table in the thing that I wrote. I wrote so many jokes for the D&D box set that okay, I'm going to roll this back a little bit. When, I forget what the director was, the guy who did Casino. Scorsese did Casino. He filmed things more violent than he needed to because he was convinced that the MPAA was going to cut it, so he'd get the R rating he wanted by overdoing it. So then they cut back
Quite
to what
an
he
early-
really
a lot of
wanted.
early directors
So
would do
I
that.
put jokes in the Rick and Morty box set that I was like, they'll cut this out, but they'll leave the other ones that I want. And they approved some of those nasty ones where I'm making fun of Wizards of the Coast in their own box set. Like on the second or third page of the rule book, it's a sidebar. And the sidebar says, well, we've already got you in for this much money, so you got to buy these tie-in products. And it was like all these other source books and things. And I go, because that's heartless capitalism, baby, or something like that. And they were like, this is great. And they left that in there. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, I guess.
It's making fun of it, but it's also advertising. So
and
that's what we get
then on the last page, there's an entire manifesto from Rick where he's basically talking that you don't need these rule books to play these games. And real role-playing doesn't require books or screens or all that other stuff, which is how I genuinely feel about it. People are like, well, how much does it cost to play D&D? And I was like, $0. $0. I have literally played tabletop role-playing games with friends of mine we had folded out a pizza box, and we were stuck under a bridge in the middle of a rainstorm, and we basically just started a role-playing game on the spot.
That's really nerdy.
Hey guys, it's raining out. Do you want to play some?
Well, we were just like trapped under a bridge, and it was torrential rain, and we were like,
That's not what I think about if I'm trapped under a bridge.
Well, we were very nerdy.
That's what I'm saying.
And we didn't have our dice on.
Well, you're in the right
but you
place.
don't need anything. You just need your imagination.
I feel like this is the start of the old man story where you're like, back in my day, we
didn't even use dice.
Yeah, we're under a bridge in a rainstorm with a pizza box.
Greasy pieces of cardboard, and we threw them in the corner.
For dice.
And if you hit a rat, then you hit a rat in the game. You're just like,
You hit a rat in real life.
You hit a rat in the game. And when you die, we take you out back and we shoot
die in
you.
real life, too.
That's right. But you don't need any of those trappings or those miniatures or any of that stuff. It's nice to have, and I have a stupidly large D&D collection now. But that's just nostalgia, like on overdrive. That's not the point of it. And the reason why these games are so wonderful is because you engage with each other and you create something that didn't exist before we sat down together. Even writing the comic, one of the things I try and do with the D&D comics is I put way more chaos into my D&D comics than I do my regular comic stories, fantasy or superhero stuff, because D&D is about rolling this die and the unexpectedness of what may happen. That even if I want the story to go this direction, the players will roll this thing and chaos will unfold. And so I always have more chaos in my D&D comic stories than I would in a normal story because I want that feeling of spontaneity. And no matter how good a plan you make, it's all going to crumble anyways, thanks to the power of the dice. And that's why it's great, is that when we're done, we're going to make some great memories together and in-jokes that no one else will understand. To this day, I have dear friends of mine. They'll just come over and they'll say weird statements, and we just cackle. And everyone's like, you guys are warped. And he's like, no, you don't understand. You see, his bard was trying to impress these orcs, and they're just like, yeah, I don't care.
Well, that's part of the core that I really liked about the series. Especially because like Rick is this tortured character that's sort of cursed by his own genius.
Yes.
Which is such an interesting concept for that character, but also like all the broken human stuff that comes with that, and just in general. But I like that you incorporated that almost like into the story as far as being he has his own tragic past.
And our
with
favorite
Dungeon
turn
Dragons.
is that Jerry's good at D&D.
Yes,
and the reason why Jerry's good at D&D is because he doesn't overthink it. He doesn't overthink it, and he's also kind of pliable. So he's much more improvisational about it, which is what you need to be good at D&D. And Rick is trying to carve his way through the story and be the power gamer controller. And so inadvertently, Jerry's own kind of moral weakness in the real world works so shockingly well in the D&D world, which was a lot of fun.
It's disarming because nobody knows how to handle Jerry.
Right.
Because he's good and he's the go-to guy and he's semi-impressive. And it's like, this is so out of character.
And it was funny, too, because Beth is like kind of turned on by it.
Yeah.
Kind of hot. It was super fun.
Well, even like that all even leads back to the Cronenberg universe and the Jerry that was created when he had nothing left and he became like this jacked monster killer. So it's sort of like I think it really keys to how they point out that Jerry preys on people feeling bad for him. That's the survival.
Right.
So when that isn't there, he actually steps up and becomes like a human being that can do something.
Right.
Yeah.
And then weird in-joke stuff like, we have the Dungeon Master from the old 80s cartoon.
Yes, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
Did you guys have to go, was there hoops to jump through to be able to do that?
Luckily, we lucked out in the sense that had just cleared internally that they were going to be able to use those materials again. It was it was literally a couple months earlier they had finally figured that all out because that had been a legal thing. And so we were like, we're Dungeon Master? And they were like, yeah, you're good. And we're, okay, great. And so we were able to incorporate that pretty effortlessly.
Oh, wow.
We did sneak in the the adventurers in
Yes.
an earlier thing where they were just basically looking in shambles, begging for coins. So they've been trapped in the Forgotten Realms for so long. Just as a little background joke.
Yeah, there was all sorts of dumb stuff. And then the dungeon master that Morty and Rick play with in the first issue, when they're teaching Morty first edition D&D, he's basically George R.R. Martin. He's just like
He's
George R.R.
definitely
Martin.
not George R.R. Martin.
No, sorry, he's
Definitely
not George R.R.
not
Martin.
George R.R. Martin,
he's,
but definitely not.
Game Master
Totally.
Martin. Yeah, no, it's really super fun stuff. We have all sorts of ludicrous jokes like that we've put in there that were really amusing. And old school, super old school D&D was a much more strategic, kind of methodical game. And Rick's friends are so obsessed with every encounter.
Yeah, I like
and how they're
that
gonna
group of
clear
Rick's
the-
old friends
Yeah,
that he used
and
to
they're
play
all super fun. And I've played so much of that old school kind of D&D, and it's this very different mindset. But it is fun too. Dungeon delving's really fun. We just go from room to room, encounter by encounter, and you're trying to outthink what the DM's going to do to try and kill you. And there's not a lot of role play. It's not a dramatic. It's like a statistical kind of a game where you're just like, okay, I think there's a pit trap here, and I'm going to get over it. You know.
So, like, are there the hoops that you guys would have had to jump through? Like, is it just Oni? You have to set Oni has to approve it, or does it have to go to like the show runners?
Oh, it's
themselves?
crazy.
Everybody's got
And so
Everybody's
because
got
you have
it.
two
Yeah.
comic companies and two license holders,
Yeah.
there's 4 different sets of notes that you're
Right.
getting, and you're trying to please all masters while pleasing yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and not losing the bite of the jokes, right? But we didn't get many jokes cut. There was one that I still pine over, and I don't even mind publicly saying it.
Yeah,
Because,
go for it.
the Paladin war cry was my favorite thing ever. So Morty becomes a Paladin, and I thought it was the funniest thing ever. He gets in his first combat, and he's terrified, and he uses Smite, and his war cry for Smite was supposed to be "Holy shit," and so he was supposed to be screaming "Holy shit" over and over again while he's killing this monster. And they were just not having it. Yeah. And we got it from multiple, they were like, no religious invectives. And we're like, come on.
He's a paladin.
Come on, he's a paladin. It's hilarious. Wow. And so they just were not down with that. And I was like, come on, it's really good. But yeah, most of the other stuff we went through.
There was only a couple things on the visual side. I couldn't have Rick give the finger, which I thought was odd.
Really?
Yeah, on the show, they give the finger
Yeah, all the time,
Give the
constantly.
finger.
Yeah, they wouldn't let us do it.
They had a whole, that was the greeting, and
Yeah.
went to the microwave.
Yeah.
Right?
Right?
Peace among worlds.
So we couldn't do it in the comic for whatever reason.
Well, we couldn't do it in the first comic. Now, the third.
They're like, you've
series
made
we've
enough
done-
money.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
can
well,
do what you want now.
Cthulhu is a whole different beast.
Rick and
'cause we
Morty
don't have
versus
to-
Cthulhu. We
Yeah.
could actually.
We did all sorts of stuff we
did
never
all-
would have gotten away with
Yeah,
in D&D.
yeah.
So, which is great.
That was fun.
It's like the dark Lovecraftian influence that just lets
Yeah.
you,
Well,
lets
it
you
was
get
also
through
we
your-
don't have to deal with Hasbro, right?
Yeah, there was a lot less approval kind of going through. Like, you didn't have 2 companies, like 3 or 4 companies
Sure.
to go for approvals, and everything is public domain. So,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, and I think that was the other. As long as I just said, "No, it's in a Lovecraft story. We're doing this," and they're like, "Really? That's in a Lovecraft story?" You're like, "Yep."
Well,
Here we go.
I love that. I would assume that when you're trying to please those masters, like I wonder how far up the chain it goes. If it's like, well, they can't do this because we're going to do this in an episode, or this
Right,
is coming
right.
up, or something similar, like this is down the line, or this doesn't gel with some
One of my-
backstory we're going to introduce.
Yeah, in Painscape, there was a moment where Adult Swim came back and they said that Summer was swearing too much. And I laughed because in a recent episode at the time when it came out, Summer had been swearing like crazy.
Yeah.
So I actually sent them, someone had done a YouTube supercut of Summer swearing. And I just sent them the link and I go, nope, we're good.
Yeah.
And they just emailed back and they said, okay, fine, approved.
At least
Thanks,
they could
Internet.
accept that.
You know, yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
fandom, for saving me this argument.
Well, even establishing in the Night People episode from last season,
Right.
where that she was like her subconscious version is a worse than
Yeah,
her.
yeah, yeah.
So that's a very interesting way to peel that as well.
Yeah, it's fun stuff. You know, I've talked to some of the people who've worked on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I've met a bunch of them, and I had a really good Jeff Loveness who'd written
Yep.
a couple episodes. We had a great conversation.
Comic writer too, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
And he was very complimentary of the miniseries
awesome.
and stuff. And
Yeah, he has a foot in both those worlds too.
yeah,
right?
we got the voice down, really cold, which really pleases me. One of the things I do, I joke when I say D&D made me a writer, I role play the characters. When I'm coming up with dialogue in particular, you're trying to get the voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't just write that. You got to say it. So I'm like sitting in my office muttering to myself, I'm Rick, I'm Morty, I'm whoever. And you got to be like, because the dialogue has to sound like it's coming out of Rick's
Mm-hmm.
mouth, and that rat-a-tat, the way he can insult, the way he can crush you with words, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to get the right cadence or make it sound like the kind of insults that he would come up with. And there's something fun about that. When you hit it and you're like, oh yeah, he'd say it like that.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was a great marriage because, like, Rick's character is basically trying to, shape reality to be what he wants it to be.
Yeah.
And that's literally what D&D is.
Troy has done a great job. He would inject extra jokes into the thing or visual gags that we hadn't even put in the script. And every so often someone will come to me and they'll go, I can't believe you guys did this. And I'm like, I cannot take credit for when in the first miniseries where Rick has got this, the weird wrist computer. And he goes, I am the dungeon master. And he's screaming.
Absolute deep cut 80s.
There's an 80s movie called The Dungeon Master, and he has that same wrist computer, and I'd never seen it. And Troy's like, you've never seen this movie called The Dungeon Master? He goes, well, I'm putting it in the comic. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And people tell me, they're like, I can't believe you guys referenced The Dungeon Master. And
That's
I'm
awesome.
Like, this guy, not me.
I got to bring my own little flair to it. I mean,
Of course.
it does come to me as a script written out and approved and stuff. And I figure out both how do I interpret that, but also what can I bring to it
Right.
as the artist and stuff. So yes, you get the action, the flow, and if I do my job well, no one notices.
Right.
So that was like one of the big problems. I want to say problems. I mean, to my credit and to my detriment, is it looks like what it's supposed to look like, and I've had a lot of people come up and say, like it felt like an episode I wish I could see. I
Right.
want to see it animated. For me, like, we would get great reviews on the story, which, that's what it's all about. It's the story, it's the characters and stuff like that. And then my contribution, which takes me months, was boiled down to
Looks just like the show.
I had nothing to complain about. So let's not talk about it.
And you're like, I don't think you understand how hard it is to put those pages together, particularly
Yeah.
the complex scenes where you're playing with multiple identities or realities or
Yeah.
creatures or all this stuff. Some of those montages that
Yeah.
I would ask poor Troy to do.
You're a
like
monster,
nine panels on a page. Every panel is a little battle or something.
We're a 3-page. We're gonna double spread Cobalt Death of the Meeseeks, millions of Meeseeks storming a castle.
The Meeseeks Adventure, that one shot that
Yeah.
we did, that was a really special one too, because they wanted us to do a brand new story. And I had that idea. I did PAX Unplugged. So that's the Penny Arcade Expo. That's all about tabletop games and stuff. And Troy wasn't there, and I had sketch covers, and I started as an artist, but I'm nowhere near Troy's level. But I'll do Rick and Morty characters. And some random fan came over, and I said, do you want me to draw Rick or Morty? And they were like, no. And I was like, oh, Summer or like Mr. Poopy Butthole or something. And they said, no, draw Meeseeks as an adventurer. And I was like, oh, what character class? And they said, whatever you want. And so I did, I think it was a barbarian of Meeseeks. And as I was finishing it, someone else watched and they go, I want a Meeseeks. Can I have a wizard Meeseeks? I was like, yeah, I can do that. That weekend, I think I did 50 or 60 Meeseeks. Way more than Rick, way more than Morty. And I was like, this is a thing.
Yeah.
This is a thing. And then I said, well, what if a Meeseeks box showed up in the Forgotten Realms? And it just stuck in my head. And so when it came time to do the deluxe edition, they said, we need a new story, but like something kind of self-contained. And I literally just sent one sentence email. I said, a Meeseeks box appears in the Forgotten Realms. And they were like, approved. Who's going to draw that? Such a terrible thing. No.
I would like to see the Kirkland brand Meeseeks box show up in the.
Oh man, that was before the Kirkland
episode,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've drawn him as an adventurer though.
Oh really?
So yeah, Gen Con last year.
Yeah, what do you
someone
want?
said, do Kirkland Meeseeks as a mage or whatever. Yeah, it was super fun.
Yeah, no, that was a really that iconic one of him with the axe. Like just got the drawing you have right in the front and
So
center.
the Frank Frazetta, really,
Yeah.
basically,
Super good.
riffing on Frazetta.
Yeah, doing the Meeseeks issue was really kind of a victory lap for us, I think, on the book, and it was a ton of fun to do, and kind of busted it all out.
It was great. I mean, and ending with Rick popping at the last minute, just taking his Meeseeks box back after all the chaos, going, "Don't touch my shit."
Don't touch my
It's just like that. Perfect.
It was very on brand. It was on brand. Yeah, that was one of the fastest scripts I think I've ever written because it was sort of all in my head and I just had to get it out. It was just like a fire hose of, all right, we got to do all this crazy crap.
Yeah.
This will be really good. And then Cthulhu was another one. I think everyone assumed we were going to do a trilogy, and I kind of wanted to buck their expectations because I don't. Even though in the book we actually hint.
Oh,
like,
you laid it out.
we'd say we got to do a trilogy, and then I was like, nah, we don't want to do a trilogy. And so I had the idea at one point. I was thinking about, okay, if we didn't do a trilogy, what would we do? And then I just had this weird thing of, well, everyone says that Rick is a nihilist. I was like, so what's the ultimate nihilism? Well, it's like, the Lovecraft mythos is all about nihilism, right? And I said, that's real nihilism, literally universe-crushing nihilism. Mm-hmm. So the ultimate nihilist versus the ultimate narcissist. And I was like, oh, that's the pitch. That's right there. And I emailed Sarah Gatos, who is now editor-in-chief at the time at Oni. I was so cocky. I just sent her an email that literally said, what do you think? And that was the title of the email. And it literally said, Rick and Morty versus Cthulhu, narcissism versus nihilism. And like 15 minutes later, she goes, call me. And I was like, all right. And we were pretty much ready to go as soon as that. And I wrote it up, and we were. And the only thing I said was I wouldn't do it unless Troy drew it.
And for me, it was kind of coming off a whole lot of Rick and Morty for a lot of years, and having that kind of unremarkable kind of response to my art and stuff. And I said, you know what, this time, this is going to fit perfectly.
Right, because
I'm going to get gunky. I'm going to give them something to comment on. I'm going to make them notice it. So I started getting out the ugliest line work I could do on watercolor paper to make this.
Because you want it to look like the mythos.
Yeah. So when it starts out clean, classic Rick and Morty, and then they go through the portal into the Lovecraftian universe, and then all my artwork gets really unky. And I was just like, I was getting really loose and messy and just playing with it a lot. And I was having so much fun because for me it was just like, oh, this is a bit of a fresh way of drawing these characters again, but in new world, new format, in a new way. And I had so much fun doing it that way that at the end when they come back and it was all reset, I'm like, oh.
You're like, no.
I'm going to miss this.
I want to stay in the creepy world.
It was great kind of visual way to kind of underscore the tone you were going for with that, I think.
It was so weird for me because I've read all the Lovecraft stuff, but reading for research is different from reading for fun. I'm doing Conan the Barbarian now and rereading the Robert E. Howard stuff, but with a real eye for like the language and the lexicon and the voice. You want that stuff to feel right. And here we're simultaneously, you're trying to do a Lovecraft story, but you're also making fun of Lovecraft as a concept and the pop culture expectation of what Lovecraft is, but also legit Lovecraft. And so it's like these weird tug of war between, like the D&D one, we love this stuff, but we're also giving it the elbow jab it deserves. And no one can hurt you like your best friend. So you have to come in with love. You have to come in. When we make fun of D&D, it's because we love it, man. Like, we love it, and so we can joke about it and poke at it and make it hurt in that way that we all know you really know what I'm talking about.
Well, there needs to be a level of familiarity to know all the insight of it to be able to poke fun of the little things and
yet,
the forgotten parts.
When people tell us that they've read the Rick and Morty D&D and they've never played D&D and it still worked for them, that's unexpected because I feel like we did some, inside baseball on that book.
I'm one of those, and I loved it.
But if it still works, then that means it's a good character story. It's a good plot. All the motivations are clear.
Yeah, and the voice of the character's unique.
When people come and pick it up, I ask, often, are you a Rick and Morty fan, a D&D fan, or both? And I kind of, because if you're not a D&D fan and you feel like, I'm not going to understand this, like, that's the whole premise. Morty needs to learn Dungeons and Dragons, and Rick's an old school gamer, and he's going to teach him the ropes in the actual multiverse of D&D. And
the ultimate irony is that, Pat and I went through the Satanic Panic in the 80s where D&D was the least cool thing imaginable, and now everyone wants to play D&D in the Rick and Morty D&D, and Morty desperately wants to learn because that's how he's going to get a hot girl. And like, it's like the antithesis of playing D&D makes you cool. Like the kids with the D&D on the back of their leather jackets and stuff. It's like, the cool kids play D&D. But that's kind of the way it is right now in pop culture. Like the number of times I talk to comic book people or people in pop culture and I say I work on D&D and they get like, whoa, man, D&D. And I'm like, what? Yes, of course. But even my students, so I teach at a university in Toronto, and most of the time when they're like, what do you work on? Even when I say I've written the Avengers, Black Panther, Iron Man, they're like, cool. I write the official D&D comic. Whoa. whoa, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And you're just like, I mean, yeah, sure, cool, all right. That's the one? That's the one pushed you over the top? Okay. Like,
It's amazing how normal all that's gotten.
Yeah.
Like, I remember reading some interviews somewhere where it said you used to like just with all the movies. Like we got a movie with Rocket Raccoon in it. Like,
Right.
You would have told me that 20 years ago.
Sure.
I would have thought you're crazy. But even just seeing a guy wearing a Superman shirt was like, oh, that's a nerd.
right?
But now you have to look for the really obscure shirts
Yeah,
to
yeah,
know
you
how
gotta go
nerdy they
super
are.
deep, dark.
You're like, it's like the bar that Superman went to in one comic one time logo, and you're like, oh, that guy knows what's
that
up.
guy knows what we're talking
Yeah.
about. No, it's super weird that way, but fun too. I played, so there's an event once or twice a year. They have a thing called D&D Live, and it's like the Apple keynote of Dungeons & Dragons.
Nice.
And they announce a bunch of new products and all this advertising and all this stuff. So my wife and I went to LA for one of these, and I got to play live on stage D&D, like a 3-hour session, streamed to hundreds of thousands of people. And it was like Matt Mercer from Critical Role was there, and B. Dave Walters, and Amanda Prosser, and like these nerd celebrities, and me, and playing D&D on stage and hanging out with each other. Deborah Ann Wall, who played like Karen Page in Daredevil.
Yeah.
We're just like hanging out playing D&D for 3 hours. And it was I got messages from old friends from high school. I got a message from someone who beat me up. So actual
Do you have
bully.
Deborah's number?
An actual
If I ever see you again, I'm gonna.
bully. And they were like, oh man, I didn't know you were doing comic books. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you would have thrown me in a trash can if you could.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the way pop culture's changed. Man.
Yeah,
That's
it's a real shift.
One of my students came over, and her hands were genuinely shaking. And she's like, can I ask you a question? And I was like, is Matt Mercer as nice in person as he seems? A Critical Role means the world to me. And I was like, okay, please tell me he's genuine. And I was like, he is just as nice. Oh, thank God. Oh, thank God. I worry
He is
about
a
that.
monster. No.
Yeah, and it's just, he eats babies.
Yes, I saw it.
Yeah, no, he's genuinely really, really nice. Everything's great. But that was like super important to her. Like she needed to know.
Yeah.
And you're like, people hang a lot of their emotional selves on the stuff that pop culture and engagement and all that stuff. And it can be weird working on those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being a part of them. And not wanting to fail at it, but also being wanting to do the story that you want to do the way you want to do it.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a whole
awesome.
other.
Well, it's fantastic. All said and done. So we should probably wrap things up here.
No worries.
We only have an hour. But
Yes.
does anybody have any questions before we get to that? Any questions at all?
Any
Just
questions?
about life in general. Like,
Yeah.
I have a buddy of mine actually. He's making his own D&D campaign. Just
Cool.
as a labor of love.
Sure.
That he wants to do. I just asked him if there's anything that I could ask for him because he lives in Florida.
Right. So in terms of like making your own D&D campaign stuff,
His own module.
here's the thing to keep in mind. Role-playing games are not stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They are inciting incidents and concepts, right? So don't write a narrative where you know how it's going to finish. Write a cool idea for a place and a potential encounter, and then let the players figure out how it's going to come to a conclusion. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, don't finish this.
This isn't a fantasy novel. When I write the comics, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. But when I write an adventure, I'm just setting up a bunch of cool dominoes, and then I want to see how you knock them down.
Okay, yeah, let the players finish.
You got it. Because otherwise, if you take the control out of their hands and you say, no matter what you do, the evil castle will collapse and the bad guy will lose, and he's going to say this monologue, they can feel that they're on rails and that they no longer have any choice to make. And that feels really unsatisfying, And so being an adventure writer is different from being a prose writer or a comic book writer or a movie writer, where you are supposed to chart the entire beginning, middle, and end. And here you kind of need to leave the last quarter open, or a lot of different ways it could go. And even then, it'll always still go different than you can imagine. And that's why we play games. If you knew how it was all going to finish, you just write a book. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, they will intentionally sabotage a game if they feel like they have to do this and do that. They will go and they will frustrate the DM to
With great-
with glee and
Oh, yeah. all the time. Your players, they enjoy making you squirm, and that's part of the fun of playing and part of the fun of DMing is that interactivity and expectation versus reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very
No
much.
problem.
Hey, Thanks for the
Any other
question.
questions? Anything we can answer for you before we send you on your way? If you want to snag the actual comics, Troy's got copies at his table, and I'm next
I'm
to
getting
them.
low, but yeah, we can get. You can
you
get
still have
them
the,
signed by both of us.
You still have the Cthulhu one?
We have. I might have a couple Cthulhu's
All right.
left.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
going right
getting
there to get one,
really,
'cause I
really
want one,
thin
so.
right now. So if you want one, I would say pop on down.
Now's the
sooner
time.
than
Yeah, they're on the
later.
artist floor. Come by, see them, and grab those books. And
We'll
thanks.
make them less than mint.
Absolutely,
Yes.
we will deface them with our scrawls.
Amazing.
Perfect.
Thank you for having us.
Oh,
Yeah,
thanks everybody
All right.
for coming, and thank you guys for being here. Enjoy the rest of the convention, guys.
We
Thank
will
you.
see you later. Take it easy. Woo!
There it is, my conversation with Troy Little and Zubb about Rick and Morty, Dungeons & Dragons. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed the episode, something a little different than what we did before. But it actually taught me a lot about Dungeons & Dragons, a bit about its history, about how comprehensive it is, and about how many different rules there are. But it was very cool, and if you're a Dungeons & Dragons person, I think this episode really spoke to you, and if you're not, I hope you got to enjoy it anyway, because it had a lot of fun stories, and even as someone like myself, who didn't have a lot of experience with Dungeons & Dragons, I certainly enjoyed the talk, and listening to those two amazing creators just talk about this fantastic collaboration. And I did pick up, I think I mentioned in the episode that I was going to go grab the Rick and Morty Meet Cthulhu story they did together, which I did grab, and just haven't had a chance to read yet. So I'll let you know how that is once I get to it. But yeah, what a great talk, great conversation, and one of many more live tapings in the future I hope to have when I perhaps do some more panel work and interviewing people. Really fun time, and I really enjoyed it, so I'd like to do it again. But anyway, in the meantime, thank you very much for tuning in, gentle listener. At the con, I did meet several people that I'm hoping to have as future guests on the show, and I will be announcing that very soon. So thank you for tuning in, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. The Graphic Histories Podcast is a proud partner of the United Federation of Podcasts.